Pro-life talk. Real world answers. This is Life Report.
Hello and welcome to Life Report, the podcast dedicated to clear pro-life thinking. I'm here today with two special guests that have been on Life Report quite often in the past. We have Jonathan Keller here, who is my boss, the Executive Director of Right to Life of Central California, and also has a new title for the first time on Life Report.
Yes, and I don't even know if I haven't had a chance to tell our other guests, but I'm also the Executive Director for California Family Council as well, so very exciting to be back.
So anytime we have politics, we've got John on. And then we also have John Gerardi, who we've had on a lot of times, who is a graduate of Notre Dame Law and now an associate at Egan, Flanagan, and Cohen in Springfield, Massachusetts. So we're glad to have John on as well. Today we're talking about the Pope.
That's right.
There's a lot of controversy stirred last month. Suddenly everybody in the pro-life movement was suddenly talking about the Pope and the things that he said in his big interview with America Magazine. So anytime we have a big Catholic subject like this, I want to get John Gerardi on to talk about it. And what was great was he had written blog posts talking about this, including he literally translated by himself a speech from Italian into English so that then he could analyze it. So I've been bragging on that to all my friends. We've got this guy coming on. He was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to translate it myself from Italian and then I'll help you understand what it means. So Gerardi, talk to us a little bit about the interview that the Pope did in the America Magazine. Is this an important interview for people to be talking about?
Well, it's been very widely reported on in every major news source in the world, so yeah, it's kind of important. The Pope sat down. The Pope is himself a Jesuit, a member of the religious order called the Jesuits, and he sat down for an interview with a major Jesuit publication in Italy, which the interview wound up being shared with Jesuit publications around the world, including America Magazine. And this interview was like 12,000 words long and was released on September 30th. And it stirred up a lot of controversy because many people interpreted it, including, I think unfairly, the mainstream media, as the Pope saying that the Catholic Church should back off a little bit from its teaching on abortion, contraception, and same-sex marriage. It's, I think, a closer analysis of what the Pope said would reveal that, shocker, the media is not exactly accurately reporting exactly the message the Pope was trying to convey.
All right, what's the message that you think the Pope was trying to convey? And then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions because this was not the clearest, I think, maybe interview I've ever read. So I'm even a little bit confused by it.
Okay. And in fairness, I would probably agree with you, Josh.
Okay.
And I think a lot of commentators would. The Pope has a penchant for saying things off the cuff, as opposed to Pope Benedict, who would sort of only think in full paragraphs.
He goes off prompter.
That was a George Weigel joke. He said Pope Benedict thought in full paragraphs. Anyway, so in this sort of one small, sort of much controverted part of the 12,000 word interview, what the Pope was saying was, the Pope said, we can't only talk about much disputed cultural issues like abortion, contraception, same-sex marriage, in a negative context with a series of thou shalt nots. What he was saying, and that, we need to sort of back away from a sort of harsh presentation of these realities. What he emphasized, rather, was that we can't always talk about these things like abortion, abortion, abortion all the time. It needs to be set in its proper context. It needs to be set within the broader context of the message of Christ and the gospel. And by setting it in its proper context, it allows the truth of those much disputed teachings to be presented in a light that is more attractive and more reasonable. And now that doesn't really work well in a headline. And so the media read that and took it to mean the Pope's saying those, stinking conservatives need to just shut up about abortion. And when that's really not at all what the Holy Father was saying. So
okay, so well then here's why I'm confused. I'm just going to read the paragraph that we're talking about, because I think the thing that's confusing to me is what he says at the end of the paragraph, not in the beginning. He says, "We cannot insist only on issues related to abortion, gay marriage, and the use of contraceptive methods. This is not possible. I have not spoken much about these things, and I was reprimanded for that. But when we speak about these issues, we have to talk about them in a context. The teaching of the church, for that matter, is clear, and I am a son of the church. But it is not necessary to talk about these issues all the time." So when I read that, I hear someone saying it's not just about the way that we talk about abortion. We should actually be talking about abortion less often than we currently are. Do you disagree with that interpretation of what he's saying?
well, there's one way, a kind of easy way to disagree with that, I suppose, which is that on October 1st, literally one day after this interview was released, the Pope gave a big speech on abortion. Some people some conservative Orthodox Catholics have actually taken the same reading of that you have, Josh. And to be frank, it's a little bit unclear exactly what the Pope means. My hope, and I think his record since this interview was published, is that really he's going to follow the example of Pope Benedict, and that he will talk about these issues. He maybe won't address them every day in every audience, but he's going to continue to address them. Really, if you look at some statements of Pope Benedict, you'll find he said much the exact same things. It's just a bit more sensational somehow when Pope Francis says it.
I think maybe my main concern, and I haven't formulated an opinion on what he's actually saying, but when I read the next sentence in the interview after that was where I got concerned. So he says, it's not necessary to talk about these issues all the time. And then he says, the dogmatic and moral teachings of the church are not all equivalent, which I totally agree with. I hate it when people think that all the moral teachings of the church are equivalent. But when he says that right after saying, or it looks like he's saying we should talk about abortion less often, that implies to me that maybe what he means is that the moral teaching of the church on abortion is less important than some other things. Would that be a bad reading of that, or what do you think?
I think given the context of how the Pope was talking about it and how he said we need to emphasize first the saving message of the gospel and to give the proper context, I think in context, and I don't think I'm just extrapolating this hopefully, in context the Pope is saying there's sort of a logical priority to things. If you're trying to evangelize someone and you just run at them and like, do you like abortion and contraception and gay marriage? Well,
that's
if not,
what
you're going
everybody
to hell.
does.
No, you got to approach them with like, okay, here is Jesus Christ. Here is the historical reality of the resurrection. Here is the church he built. Here is our teaching on human dignity, on the nature of the human person, on this unique otherness of humanity from other created entities.
Right.
From this follows this teaching on abortion that we have, where yes, we do condemn it, but it's not because we hate you, it's because we love you and we want what is for the best for human persons. So I think there is a kind of logical priority in which the teachings of Christianity sort of need to be presented if they are going to be presented in an attractive way. And I think that's what the Pope was saying. There's a kind of logical priority to the resurrection, the incarnation, the redemption of mankind. That sort of stuff needs to be presented first before you start getting to particulars like abortion, gay marriage, etc.
And John, I agree with you. I actually think that I can understand why some people would take what the Pope was saying out of context, especially the news media. Just one thing that I talked to some friends afterwards about was that you have to remember this is the same news media that what is the most famous verse in today's postmodern culture? It's Matthew 7:1. Judge not.
To be judged. Yeah.
And in context, 14 verses later, in Matthew 7:15, it says, "But by your fruits you shall know them." So you can't be that surprised when the news media literally is not willing to read 15 verses within context, that they're going to take something that is 12,000 words out of context.
Right.
So
at one point, even the Pope almost said verbatim, "I don't want to say too much about this because he who speaks too much runs the risk of being misinterpreted. He actually said that in the interview,
Right.
which left me sort of going, gosh.
Yeah, but
Anyway.
I don't know, but I'm struggling because he did say these things, though,
but
and they're really confusing to me.
And I understand that, but here's going to what John said. I actually agree to a certain degree with John, because I think that, as the lowly Protestants in the room, I'm not even an Episcopalian or an Anglican. I'm still a Baptist. So it's interesting because I think a lot of people that I know, a lot of my friends that I've talked to, both evangelicals and Catholics, are sometimes you can go to an angle where you are so dogmatically focused on what the church is against that is what we make the defining mark of Christianity, is not, like you said, John, not the gospel, not Jesus' sacrifice and redemption, but the fact that, oh, well, you know what, if you're going to be a Christian, you have to be anti-abortion. Now, I agree with that. I think that it's pretty hard to really be an authentic follower of Christ and believe that legalized abortion is acceptable and morally okay. But I also know there's a lot of people that disagree with legalized abortion and have no relationship or connection with the gospel. And I think, and I agree with you, Josh, I think maybe he could have been a little bit more concise, and he probably could have been a little bit more clear. But I think that's probably what the Pope was trying to get at there, was the fact that if you have, for example, the thief on the cross, Jesus wasn't telling him the particulars of, the dignity of the human person. He wasn't going over. If someone is on their deathbed, you're not necessarily going to try to, convert them to the position that all human life is sacred. You're going to probably share with them the single most crucial tenets of, the Christian faith.
Yeah. Okay. So I understand what you're saying. I'm going to ask you in a second, John, about the speech the next day. But what I'm hoping that speech, when you explain it to us, is going to help shed light on that sentence where he says, because remember, I feel like when he says the dogmatic and moral teachings of the church are not all equivalent, I'm not sure that in that point he's talking about it's all about gospel first and then this other stuff. I think he's making a statement just about the moral teachings of the church. And I would like to think that he would say that abortion is one of the more important moral teachings of the church. And so, John, why don't you tell me about the speech the next day to the group of Catholic gynecologists, and tell me if you think that sheds light on what he meant by that.
Okay, let me explain the context of it. Okay, so the Pope regularly meets with different groups of people and gives audiences to them, and he met with a group of Italian Catholic OBGYNs, and he gave an address to them. And this address came the day after the big interview, as people have taken to calling it, was published. And it was a wonderful, wonderful talk, and you can find the translation on my blog in English, in which the Holy Father laid out sort of the traditional bioethical standards by which medicine has always held that abortion is wrong, sort of drawing on themes that are in the Hippocratic Oath. But then he moved beyond that to say that in the person that, as Christ says, whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me, that in the face of the weakest people in our society, including the unborn, the sick, that we see the face of Christ. And by developing sort of, and I think in that speech, he followed sort of the plan that I and many others were following, that were thinking that he was laying out as his sort of plan for how to evangelize. He lays out first the reality of Christ's saving action, and uses that, those sort of more fundamental teachings, if you will, as the basis, the setting for developing a thesis that ends with, and so abortion is bad. Jesus Christ loves all men. He died for all mankind. He identified himself with the lowly and the weak and the persecuted by dying as one of them, as someone who was lowly and weak and persecuted. The lowliest and weakest people in our society are the unborn. And through Christ's exaltation of human dignity by becoming a man, we see that the unborn are members of the human community. and that they shouldn't be killed. So I know, Josh, that there is some fear that that statement, not all the moral and dogmatic teachings of the church are on the same level. I think the Pope was saying there, it's not like the moral teachings of the church are like negotiable or anything. He says specifically in that interview, I'm a son of the church and I believe what the church teaches. No Pope is going to be saying, well, abortion it's unimportant. It's a matter of logical priority. The saving action of Christ is sort of the foundation for the moral theology that we have to develop in order to present particular issues like abortion, etc.
So tell me about the response from people who did read the entire thing, and I think some media people did read the whole thing before they wrote their deal. But tell me about responses from conservatives, from Catholics, from cardinals, the people that you're kind of that you've got your eyes on. What has been the response to these interviews and these statements?
The response has been mixed. The response from what you might call the more liberal wing of the church has been very similar to their reaction to the Second Vatican Council, which is not to read the text of what he says very carefully and to develop. A lot of people have talked about, there was this old canard of the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, which is a church council in the early to mid 60s, that liberals sort of adopted as their own and did all kinds of crazy things within the Catholic Church, using it as their excuse, even though they never read the documents of the Second Vatican Council, which were actually fairly conservative. There's a similar spirit of Pope Francis that I think has developed, where liberals are now claiming anything that they want to believe and think and appealing to Pope Francis to do it. So as a result of the massive, I think, misinterpretation of what the Pope means, of what the Pope is trying to say, a lot of conservatives like myself are sort of wishing the Pope would stop giving interviews, because he gave another one the next week, which caused almost more confusion. And it sort of seems like, gosh, maybe there's a reason Pope Benedict didn't talk about so much stuff, off the cuff like this. So that's our opinion, but I think the editor of First Things journal, R.R. Reno is his name, put it best when he said, Pope Francis is a conservative, but he uses the language of the left to communicate his points. So when he talks about something like we can't always talk about abortion, that is sort of the language of the left. And when the left says we talk less about it, what they mean is you should totally capitulate on the issue of abortion. And that's the natural reaction that the left had when they read it, that abortion, so much so that the day after the interview, NARAL released a big statement saying, thank you, Pope Francis. For what? For saying that maybe we shouldn't hammer people over the head with the abortion message? I mean, and then the very next day, Pope Francis made them look like idiots by giving a speech about abortion, why it's bad. But I think that's the best description sort of why so much of what Pope Francis has said is controverted, is that he employs the language of the left. Employs language that is sort of lefty sounding.
So John, tell me this, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you and just say there's someone listening, there's probably many people listening that would think, well, okay, a possible interpretation of this whole thing, if you of both interviews, both the interview and then the speech the following day, is maybe he actually did mean what it looks like he said, that we should talk about abortion less often. It's the first time he'd even, as far as I know, really mentioned abortion in any interview. And then the following day he gives a speech, but it's a speech to a group of gynecologists. If what else are you going to talk about? Then obviously you're going to talk about abortion then. So is it possible to be well, that's not an out, Because where else are you going to give some kind of a pro-life speech? Has he talked about abortion much since, or is that the only speech that he's given on abortion, and is there any reason for concern about that?
Well, I don't think so. Really, if you look at the papal speeches of, say, Benedict XVI, I think Pope Francis is pretty much consistent with him. I mean, they talk about abortion at pretty much the same rate. Actually, here's a fun quote. Try to guess who said it. Christianity, Catholicism, isn't a collection of prohibitions. It's a positive option. It's very important that we look at it again because this idea has almost completely disappeared today. Sorry, I'm trying to read this one thing that Pope Benedict said, where he said we don't have to talk about abortion all the time. Basically, I'm saying I don't think there's this big contrast between what Pope Francis is saying now and what Pope Benedict has said at many points, or what Pope John Paul II probably would have said, or, on and on and on and on. It's not like the Pope's job is to talk about abortion literally every single day. And to be frank, Pope Francis appeared in person and led the Italian March for Life. He has done things with abortion, and I don't think it's letting up. Now, could he have done more? Maybe. And I think there's some good arguments for it, particularly in light of, when Ireland, a few months ago legalized abortion, the Holy See really didn't say a whole lot about it. And I was kind of disappointed in that, because I thought, Ireland's like one of the few totally Catholic countries that completely outlaws abortion, left in the world. So I think there's something. I am not as concerned as I think some people are. I think he's pretty much consistent with Pope Benedict. Could he have done more? Perhaps, but I don't think his job is to talk about abortion literally every day.
I think one of the things that's been interesting is that for all the evangelicals that I know, including Josh and Gabby Veers and some other people that I've talked to, they really enjoy Pope Francis' tone and some of his language. And John, I think, like you said, it's not so much that he's changing core doctrines of the church, but I think that a lot of times, a lot of Protestants get hung up on the fact that, it's the Pope, so I must automatically disagree with whatever he was about to say. And then they realize, oh, wow, this is a lot more of, what C.S. Lewis would call mere Christianity. And I think that the fact that he's been communicating that in the public square, I think actually does a great service to, obviously, to the Catholic Church, but I think it does a good it does a great service to even evangelicals, because it allows us to kind of use it as a point in conversation to talk about Christ's message and Christ's love for all humanity and, like you said, his redemptive work. And I think in some cases that could actually pay dividends in the pro-life arena, because it allows us to kind of say we're still against abortion, but we also want to be relational. We want to be loving. We want to build common ground and show compassion for you as an individual, not just the unborn.
Yeah, but I think that's different, though. I think what I try to do that's similar but not the same to that is, okay, I care a lot about abortion, but I also care about sex slavery. Mm-hmm. I also care about a lot of other areas where people are being hurt. And the statement in front of me, I know that it's not the Pope's job to talk about abortion every day. But I think that's not Mike. I don't think I care that much how often the Pope talks about abortion. I think I'm concerned if the Pope is telling everybody else not to talk about abortion very much, because there wouldn't be weird for someone to say, let's not talk about the legalization or not of marijuana every day. I'd be like, hey, I totally get that. But this is a Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit weird for me anytime someone says, let's not talk about this Holocaust so often, because it makes me think, maybe are they lowering the concern?
And Josh, that's been one criticism of the Pope's statement that I actually kind of agree with, is that it seems like a solution that's looking for a problem. I guess, where are all of these pro-life Catholic priests who are unreasonably and belligerently nailing people over the head about abortion? I mean, if there's any problem, it's that bishops and priests in the United States don't talk about abortion enough, really. And I think part of it is the Pope is from South America, and from Argentina, where a lot of the countries in South America have actually pretty restrictive abortion laws.
See, that's
already.
interesting.
Yeah.
And he's coming from a very different kind of mindset than, say, if I'd say if Cardinal Dolan were elected Pope, I don't think he would have said that.
Yeah.
If Cardinal Burke were had been elected Pope, he definitely wouldn't have said that. He probably, would say that priests need to be more forceful in talking about this stuff. And that's also, there's one point, the South American context has to be in the background when people read the Pope. Like, there's one point in the article where Pope Francis says, "I've never been a right-winger." What he means is like a right-winger in South American terms, which means like a dictator who like throws you in jail if you go, help a poor person. Like, it's being a right-winger. So we have to sort of understand the context that he's coming from.
Yeah, you can't just translate the actual words from, Italian to English. You also do have to realize, like you said, I mean, growing up, the reason I think that he has talked so much about loving the least of these and about poverty is because poverty in, Rio looks totally different than poverty in the United States.
Here's the thing. What John was saying about all the beneficial things that has come from what the Pope has said, I agree with John with one proviso. I agree that what he says has been excellent when it is pre-prepared.
It's when he goes off prompter.
And even actually, to be fair to him, a lot of his off-the-cuff stuff is really good too. It's been one sort of bone of contention is that every day the Pope gives an extemporaneous short homily and offers Mass publicly, which Benedict XVI, which no Pope before him has ever done. And maybe there are reasons for that. But I think that his style is actually very refreshing and it's very appealing to a lot of people. And that if he continues to do that, that would be great. But from a PR standpoint, maybe run some things by some editors first, maybe pre-prepare some things. But, he's the Pope. Who the heck am I?
That's right. Okay, that is it for this episode of Life Report. John Gerardi, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us. Your perspective is always helpful.
What's your blog, by the way, if people want to follow you more?
My blog is johnvgerardi.wordpress.com. And I'm guessing Josh will include a link to it.
I'll link to that in the show notes. You can go to prolifepodcast.net/183 for episode 183, and we'll have the link right there. Thanks so much, John, for being on. And remember, you can have a great impact in any conversation if you remember to ask good questions, listen to understand, and find genuine common ground when possible. Have a great week. Now go talk to someone.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real-world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.